Hey guys, welcome back to another one of my Avengers Endgame videos. Now before I get started, I want to tell you that this video is going to include spoilers, so if you haven't watched the movie, make sure you tune out of this video and watch it later once you've watched the movie. On another note, on this video, I'm going to be talking about all the Marvel Cinematic Universe nods, references, and Easter eggs on Avengers Endgame. Now there are two ways to talk about all of this. One of them is to discuss all the cameos on this movie, and there are a lot of them, so I'm going to leave that for another video. And the other one is to basically talk about all the Easter eggs, references, and nods, like direct Easter eggs, references, and nods to all of those movies. I'm going to talk about some of the cameos on this video, but the others I'm going to leave for a separate video. There's a lot to say about them. Some of them are interestingly enough pop culture references, but that's for another video. But let's for the time being talk about all those statements made on this movie, all of those moments on this movie that do reference every single movie within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So let us go for these, starting with Captain America, the first Avenger. Early on in the events of said movie, Bucky tells Steve, "Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone," and Steve responds, "How can I? You're taking all the stupid with you." That was right before Steve would have to spend a lot of time before he sees Bucky again. Now that does apply here once again, only the roles are reversed, and Steve is the one that tells Bucky, "Hey, don't do anything stupid while I'm gone," and Bucky responds, "How can I? You're taking all the stupid with you." Now still on Captain America, the first Avenger, the last interaction, face-to-face interaction between him and Peggy Carter was actually their first kiss. The last interaction that we do see on this movie between Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter happens to be yet another kiss, possibly their first kiss after being reunited in the 70s. Let us not forget as well that as of the end of the first Avenger, Steve Rogers did owe Peggy Carter a dance. And as the end of Endgame, the final scene of Endgame, he's finally paying up what he owes Peggy Carter. But finally though, when it comes to the first Avenger, there is also the "I can do this all day." That's basically a reference to that scene in the back alley where he's beaten down by a bully before Bucky comes to the rescue. But there's also Margaret Carter, director of S.H.I.E.L.D. That's basically a reference to the Marvel one-shot Agent Carter, where Peggy Carter, by the end of the one-shot, is basically appointed to run S.H.I.E.L.D. Now next to that is the proof that Tony Stark has a heart. That's basically a reference, the obvious reference, to Iron Man 1. Another reference to Iron Man 1 would be "I am Iron Man." That's basically the final words that he said on the Iron Man 1 movie, telling everyone, the public, that he is the person that they know as Iron Man. On Endgame, and right before Thanos is about to snap his fingers for a second time, he tells Tony Stark, "I'm inevitable." And Tony Stark, who's taking the gems away from him, the stones away from him, tells him, "And I am Iron Man." And these are basically the final clear words that we hear coming out of Tony Stark before he dies, right after. We've also got a reference to Iron Man 2, and that's inherent in the conversation between Tony Stark and Howard Stark, because that's exactly when he discovered that his father did care. Moving on though, the entire talk by Bruce Banner about, thinking of the Hulk as a disease, that's basically the Incredible Hulk. His speech about why he should be the one to wield the Infinity Gauntlet, because gamma radiation, that's basically all about the reason behind his transformations into the Incredible Hulk. But next up though is Thor getting his hammer and yelling, "I'm worthy." Now that was basically about the first Thor movie, when Odin stripped him of his powers and of his hammer and deemed him unworthy. Now this one could be considered as well a reference to Age of Ultron, when they all try to lift the hammer and he tells them the simple reason, the simple explanation for the fact that you can lift the hammer is because you're simply all unworthy. But moving on to the Avengers, the fact that they traveled to 2012, the entire Battle of New York, that's basically a reference to the Avengers. Loki being imprisoned, that's a reference to the Avengers as well. Now while a lot of us comic book lovers basically orgasmed in the middle of the theater as soon as we heard Steve Rogers scream the words, "Avengers Assemble," the words also happen to be a reference to the first Avengers movie because they happen to be the tagline to said movie. But moving on though from all the references to the Phase 1 movies and into the references to the Phase 2 movies, we've got two references to Iron Man 3. The first one is the cameo by Harley, and the second one is Pepper Potts in a suit, even though that last one means that we also got a comic book reference in it because we basically got Rescue right out of the comics. Now, the references to Thor the Dark World were basically all over the place, just like the case was with the references to the 2012 The Avengers, because basically the entire setup, the 2013 Asgard setup, that's all about Thor the Dark World. But when it comes to specifics, we've got the mention of the death of his mother, we've got the illness of Jane Foster, and finally, the imprisonment of Loki. But moving on though to Captain America the Winter Soldier, the entire Hydra squad, I've mentioned that before, that's a reference to Captain America the Winter Soldier. The entire elevator scene, that's also a reference to Captain America the Winter Soldier. And finally, the comment made by Tony Stark about them being Hydra, and the response by Scott Lang, how come you didn't notice that they were Hydra? Because, they do look like bad guys. That's also a reference to Captain America the Winter Soldier. But on another note, there are a lot of cameos that do reference this movie. Gonna be talking about that on my cameos video. On another note as well, the entire thing about Jasper Sitwell being there, the entire thing about Jasper Sitwell being Hydra, that's all a reference to Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Seasons 1 and 5. But the biggest one of all of these happens to be the one that had comic book creators like myself orgasming in the theater, which is basically the Hail Hydra by Captain America, because it is both a comic book Easter egg and reference and also a reference to Captain America the Winter Soldier. But next up though is the entire sequence in Morag, Peter Quill dancing, listening to music, singing out loud. That is basically right out of the opening sequence of Guardians of the Galaxy, Volume 1. There's also the obtaining the Power Stone from the Temple of the Power Stone by War Machine and Nebula, and even though not by Peter Quill, but that's also a straight-out reference to the same movie. But Nebula's conversations with Gamora were all about a lot of references to that movie. The choice was between him and a tree. By the end of the first Guardians movie, Gamora was basically falling for Peter Quill. There's also the conversation about Nebula trying to kill her multiple times before they became friends, before they became sisters. That's once again a reference to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 and actually Volume 2 as well. But next up though is Avengers Age of Ultron, and the biggest reference over here happens to be that Captain America was finally able to wield Thor's hammer. Now that is basically about the attempt by everyone to lift Thor's hammer on Avengers Age of Ultron, and the fact that Captain America Steve Rogers was the only one who was capable of moving the hammer, slightly but still the only one capable of doing it. Now once again, this was one of those moments that were really orgasmic for a lot of comic book readers, because Captain America on the pages of the comics was basically one of a select few able to wield Thor's hammer. But speaking of more on Age of Ultron, there's all the angry talk at the beginning of Endgame by Tony Stark about their suit of armor around the world. Screw the precious freedoms, the most important thing is protecting the world. But on the subject of shields, there's that hologram shield that we see with Iron Man. For some reason, I don't remember if we did get it on the movie or if it was just on the trailers. But in all cases, and just like they gave us Jarvis a reference to none other than Agent Carter, it is possibly a reference to Coulson's shield on Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But moving on though to Ant-Man and Ant-Man and the Wasp, I'm going to talk about both together really. We get the Hank Pym cameo in 1970, and that's basically all about his work with S.H.I.E.L.D., which he did mention extensively on both movies. There is the extensive use of the Pym particles and the Pym particle technology, the quantum realm, and finally there is also the original Ant-Man helmet in Pym's lab. But that is just the 1970s part, because there is the present day part in which we end up getting cameos during the funeral at the end of the movie for both Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne, so pretty much an Ant-Man and the Wasp reference. Now I might have missed this one early on and before we move deeper into phase 3 of the movies, but the calling out of the name Zola is basically all about Artem Zola. Now the mention of the name Zola, Dr. Zola, that's all about Captain America the First Avenger. It could also be considered a reference to Captain America the Winter Soldier, but nonetheless in the first place and first and foremost, it is all about the First Avenger. But moving on, the entire resolution to the trouble or the fallout between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, that's all about Civil War. That's a reference to Civil War. But we've also got Ant-Man arriving at, the Avengers HQ early on in the events of the movie. He's there, he's talking about Berlin, meeting them a few years ago. Now that's once again all about Civil War. But more on Civil War. At the beginning of the movie, Tony Stark tells Cap that he's lost a boy. Now the boy is basically a reference to Spider-Man, but also the fact that Captain America has not met the boy except on Civil War, so pretty much a reference to Civil War as well. We've got Natasha and Clint fighting against one another once again. That's basically a reference to Civil War as well, at least the beginning of Civil War. But the next one is Doctor Strange, and that's pretty much the obvious. The entire conversation between the Hulk and the Ancient One, and especially when she tells him stuff like, "You're 5 years early," or "He's across town doing surgery," or more importantly, the main reason that she recruited him, "He's supposed to be the best of us." Now this entire conversation as well does contain an explainer for Infinity War, and also a reference to it. Bruce Banner tells her that Doctor Strange gave up the stone willingly, and she realized, okay, he must have done that for a reason. He is supposed to be the best of us. So that's basically an explainer for why Strange gave it willingly. We'll never know if Thanos could have taken it by force, but we know now that even if, Strange would have still always given him the stone willingly, because this statement that Bruce Banner tells the Ancient One is the main reason that she does give him the stone. Now, as far as references to Thor Ragnarok go, we've got the conversation that goes on between Professor Hulk and Thor, and that's basically about Thor helping the Hulk during the events of Thor Ragnarok. But of course as well, we've got the obvious Mick and Korg cameos. These are basically all about Thor Ragnarok. Let us not forget as well that by the end of the movie, he does make Valkyrie Queen over New Asgard. And yes, that's probably partially all about that she's showing character on this movie, but also possibly because she did show character during the events of Thor Ragnarok. But when it comes to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, we've got the idea that we became sisters. You know, the conversation between Nebula and Gamora. That, along with one of her attempts to kill Gamora, is all about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. But moving on though to Spider-Man Homecoming, the only thing that I could think of over here happens to be the cameos by Ned and by Aunt May. Now, except for the Doctor Strange bit and a couple of others, I'm not going to speak much of Infinity War because this was basically a continuation for Infinity War, so the movie is basically expected to kind of reference Infinity War and repeatedly. But there were a few ones that did stand out. Thor going for the head is a very important one. Scarlet Witch being in the battleground, that reminds us of Infinity War, the Battle of Wakanda. You know, when she was up with Vision, then decided to go down to save everyone, to help everyone, and at that moment Okoye went, why was she up there all this time? The fact that she also went for Thanos, almost soloed him herself, that was basically a reference to that moment that he took Vision away from her. He beat her down and took Vision away. She does even mention it right then and there. You took everything away from me. Nick Fury in Tony Stark's funeral, you know, being seen right after Captain Marvel, reminds us of the sequence at the end of Infinity War. The last thing we saw on that post-credit scene of Infinity War was all about Nick Fury standing right there before the pager dropped to the ground as he turned into dust, and then a few seconds later, we ended up realizing that he was paging Captain Marvel. There is just this beautiful symmetry to all of it. But okay though, my favorite one happens to be Tony Stark dying, or almost dying, in the arms of Spider-Man, because it kind of reverses the situation that happened at the end of Infinity War. On Infinity War, Spider-Man turned into dust in the arms of Iron Man, but then right now on Endgame it's pretty much the other way around, so it has this beautiful symmetry to it as well. It's like a reversal of roles, and a beautiful reversal of roles as well. Now, the last of these Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that was referenced on this movie happens to be Captain Marvel, and when it comes to Captain Marvel, it happens to be about that scene at the very beginning of the movie, like, where have you been when all of this happened? Rhodey asked her at that point. Now, her answer over there was all about why she left Earth in the first place at the end of the Captain Marvel movie. You know, to be a protector of all those other planets out there, starting with the Skrulls, but nonetheless extend to all those galaxies out there and all those planets out there. But in the context of other Marvel Cinematic Universe references or Easter eggs, a lot of people are expecting Thanos to make an appearance as a baby or as a child on the upcoming Eternals movie. Now, on this movie, we got that joke by Rhodey. You know, we go back and we kill Thanos, baby Thanos. Now, this could possibly be a reference to the Deadpool joke that we all know, if I could travel back in time, I'd kill baby Hitler. But nonetheless, it could also be a hint to the idea that we are gonna see a baby Thanos or a child Thanos on the upcoming Eternals movie. The fact that we got a mention of Budapest from Clint Barton talking to Natasha, that's basically about that mission that we don't yet know anything about, and yet it keeps getting referenced a lot when it comes to their history together with S.H.I.E.L.D. The entire thing about Black Widow dying is all about the idea that we're only getting a prequel Black Widow movie. Now, there's always the chance that she's not going to be dead for good. There's always the chance that we're not seeing a prequel movie, that we're being told that we are seeing a prequel movie in order not to realize that she's not really dead. But nonetheless, in all cases, for the time being, and for all intensive purposes, Black Widow is dead. With that being said though, this is all I noticed, or at the very least, all I remember from watching the movie. I might remember more stuff, I'm going to mention it on my next Easter egg and references video, when I talk about the references and Easter eggs to the comic books. But if you do remember anything that I did miss over here, let me know in the comments down below what it is. If not, let me know in the comments down below what your favorite Easter eggs on this movie to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or references and nods to the Marvel Cinematic Universes happen to be. Let me know as well if you did like this video by dropping it a much appreciated like, subscribing to this channel, and enabling notifications for my future videos, community posts, and live streams. But until the next time that you tune in for another one of my videos, Avengers Endgame or otherwise, thank you so much for tuning into this one, and have a great day.